I think that there are a lot more like outstanding technologists than there are marketers of technology. And I think that's particularly true in AEC, in contrast to other B2B segments where, everybody is on LinkedIn and using it regularly or whatnot. In construction, there's a big chunk of the population that, they may have a profile up, but they're not using it on a day-to-day basis. And you'll reach some of your market that way, but not all of it, right? So if you're betting all your chips there in AEC, you're betting wrong. I do think that startups often make a mistake in hiring someone to drive marketing who's young and cheap. And they're like, oh, that person's super smart and they'll figure it out. Well, but guess what? They're figuring it out on your dime. Right? And they're going to make mistakes for sure. And they're going to make some mistakes that are expensive.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Bricks and Bytes podcast, where we dive into construction and AEC technology. Before we get started though, if you're a startup founder or operator responsible for innovation in your company, or you want a deeper, more insightful look into technology in AEC, you won't want to miss our newsletter. From deep dives into particular technologies such as AI, robotics, design, software, and so on. Hot takes from investors betting big in AEC technology, and advice on building tech companies, including the stories and takeaways of the most successful AEC technology founders. Head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today to get this exclusive material straight to your inbox. And now for the episode.
I'll be recorded. Oh yeah, I can see the timer now. For some reason, our new software, whenever you press record, takes a couple of seconds to kick in. But anyway, I was just saying to you before I hit record that despite doing 300 and something of these specific recordings online on Riverside, I still haven't quite mastered the introduction phase. So what better way to introduce a podcast than to mention that? Okay, anyway. Okay, Phil. So thank you so much for joining us. I will let you do the honors with the introduction to yourself. So why don't you go ahead and tell us who you are, what you do, etc.
Sure. So my name is Phil Carpenter, and these days I am a marketing consultant and a fractional chief marketing officer, or CMO, for young technology startups. I also teach at my local university, which is UC Santa Barbara. I live here in Santa Barbara, California. Longtime Silicon Valley guy, moved here a couple of years ago and continue to share my time between the two locations. So I specialize in tech marketing, particularly actually in the AEC world. I have spent several years doing just that. And I also, for quite some time, have run a small real estate development company in Phoenix, Arizona, that does ground up construction of both single family homes and duplexes that we then run under a build to rent model. So, very, very steeped in the construction world. I've spent about 30 years doing technology marketing and have worked on B2B businesses, B2C businesses. I've consulted, I've done this sort of whole 9 yards. But I really am passionate about the discipline of marketing. It's what I do. It's also what I teach. And I'm a serial startup guy. I have done that for almost my entire career. Call me a glutton for punishment. But I really enjoy the process of getting involved very, very early in a company's life and helping to shape what it is.
Lovely. Before we started recording, you said that you focus only on the AEC industry with regards to the marketing. Why did you pick this industry?
Because there's a need, Martin. Because there's a need. I think that
Supply and demand, right?
Yeah. I think that's very true within technology as a whole. I think that there are a lot more like outstanding technologists than there are marketers of technology. And I think that's particularly true in AEC. I think that it's a tricky segment because one, is crowded. There are a lot of people trying to bring interesting solutions to market. Two, it's a customer base that can be skeptical, right? They're very much like, hey, show me. Like, I need to understand what this is, why it's going to help me. I want to see others that have done it, and don't make it so technical that I can't understand. Right? Like I'm a practical person, so give it to me straight. Right? That's what our customers are like in this world, I believe. They're not just all interested in the latest shiny thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Phil, you mentioned that you do you're also a lecturer at Santa Barbara University in California. It is California, right? I just
It
said
is
that.
California.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, just checking. We're in London here, so our geography is sometimes a little bit off. So yeah, I think it's very interesting to actually understand what you teach. And is there anything that you like, principles that just come up time and time, like timeless stuff that you see within the marketing space that perhaps people don't tend to forget about or just don't quite get right?
It's funny that you say that. I just taught a lecture on Wednesday about a book that I think is just absolutely seminal for technology marketers, and it's been around for a while, right? It's called Crossing the Chasm, and it was written by a guy by the name of Jeffrey Moore, and longtime industry consultant. And he talks about how startup companies, when they are trying to move from early adopters to a sector of the market that they call early majority, don't get that right, and they consistently fail because they don't understand how to make the transition from one segment to the other, because those sectors of the market are really different. The innovators are looking for the latest technologies that can bring them competitive advantage. They are willing to work with stuff that's a little raw, but the early majority, when the kind of the bell curve of technology adoption starts to really move up and get bigger, they want those solutions to be proven. They want there to be reference customers, and often getting from one to the next is really hard. And Jeff talks in his book about how you do that. And I have seen that thinking to be relevant time and time again. Doesn't matter what segment it is in. And so in my most recent lecture, I was talking to my students about why this matters and how it works and how you cross that chasm. So it's classic marketing thinking, and it's just as relevant as in AEC as it would be in many other segments.
Are there certain things? Could you give us some insight, perhaps from a marketing perspective, as to what you do then before you cross the chasm, and then once you're the other side of it?
Sure. So the key in crossing the chasm is to identify a beachhead, right? And the analogy that is used in the book, which I think is great, is storming the beaches of Normandy, right? So when the Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy, they picked a point to cross. They didn't try a whole bunch of points. They picked a set of beaches to push upon, right? And the idea was like, look, grab a toehold there, and from there we can expand. And the same holds true in B2B technology marketing. You need to identify your initial segment, right? Your beachhead. Who are those customers in what segment that need you most? And then really push hard to gain visibility and credibility and success with them. Because if you can do that, then these customers can sort of look to references within that beachhead, and they will be much more content with adopting your solution because it's proven, right? And from there, you can push further, expand into adjacent segments. He also talks about if you imagine going bowling, right? And there's that head pin, that first pin. You need to whack that first pin hard. And when you do, it sends the other pins, cascading outward, right? But you got to hit the head pin, and that in turn will hit adjacent pins. So both, whether you're bowling or whether you're invading Normandy, both are great analogies. But so many young companies forget to do that, and they try to sell everything to everybody, and it's kind of a disaster.
So maybe you can lay out what AEC startups are doing wrong amongst what you just said.
Well, I think the classic mistake is not being disciplined and focused about picking a target segment and chasing it really hard. They sell over here, they sell over there. And especially like, look, salespeople can often be very transactional, very coin operated, as we say. They're looking to close deals and make their quota, and they're not disciplined enough about sticking to an initial segment and driving success there. And I've seen that, many times in AEC. And if they don't do that, they end up with this sort of scattered set of initial wins, and they never have that set of victories that they can point to within a particular segment that will allow them to truly cross that chasm and to push further into it. I think that AEC is a segment where people are very, very much looking to others to see, well, what have they done and how did they do it? Were they successful? Those case studies are really, really important. And if you don't have them, you won't make it.
That's interesting. Do you have any advice, Phil, on I guess one response to this question would be it depends on the product, but how about like more broadly speaking, is there a way to identify the segment? Like are there a few tests perhaps you can run so you know which segment you should just go, right, this is the one, kaboom.
I mean, you need to know who you're selling to and what you're selling to. That's the identification of the segment, or that's something different.
No, you absolutely need to know who you are selling to and how strong the fit is, right, between what you offer and that particular group of customers. I also find, on that same vein that many young companies don't do nearly enough research just talking to prospective customers, right? Before they go out and spend a bunch of marketing money, against programs that are going to be hopefully, ginning up new customers. They should be spending a lot of time in market with those prospects and understanding what they truly need and whether you're building something that's, that's going to work for them, or if not, what you need to do to change your plan in order to meet their needs, as opposed to, just kind of an if you build it, they will come attitude, which I think is wrong and yet is prevalent in technology circles. Doing your homework up front and digging in hard and doing that initial customer validation, it's critical.
What might that look like, Phil? Just like, okay, so perhaps you've identified your segment, and now, like, what happens then? Is it a process of like personas and then messaging and so on and so forth? Like, how do you?
So think about it. You have a hypothesis, right?
He's asking for a secret sauce.
So you might have a hypothesis like I'm designing this particular product. I think it's going to fit with this group, but I need to know. Go out and do customer interviews, right? Just talk to people. I remember when I was a young product manager, like right out of Harvard Business School, I worked for Intuit, the makers of Quicken and QuickBooks and TurboTax. And I worked on the QuickBooks product, which is their small business accounting product. And Scott Cook, who was the founder of that company, the inventor of Quicken, he would always push us, discipline us when we had questions that we were trying to solve about the product. He'd say, guys, go talk to 10 customers. Mm-hmm. Well, we would go and we, at that time it was all by phone, right? And we'd be having like really detailed conversations with these prospective users of our small business accounting software to try to figure out whether we were focused on the right thing and solving in the right way or not. And if we weren't, we would redirect and change things. And that stuff is both informative and humbling, because so often, guys, we're wrong. We think we know what the market wants and what will be good for them. And then they school us, right? We go and we talk to them. We realize like, no, we're off. And we change things. But like that humility is good, and we need to learn it and learn from it.
Mm-hmm. I'm very curious, like what's the right ratio in terms of content and marketing? Is it video? And to what degree is it articles? Is it LinkedIn? Is it some other TikTok? Maybe, I don't know, within the AEC. What is the current ratio that people should be doing?
So I think it should be a mix, right? And I think also it really does depend on to whom you're selling, right? I think within AEC, many of those tools that you suggest are probably pretty important. I don't think TikTok is something that really matters most AEC buyers. So let's set that aside. If you're selling a B2C product, yes. But LinkedIn, for example, sure, absolutely, it matters. But also remember, in contrast to other B2B segments where everybody is on LinkedIn and using it regularly or whatnot, in construction, there's a big chunk of the population that, yeah, they may have a profile up, but they're not using it on a day-to-day basis. And you'll reach some of your market that way, but not all of it, right? So if you're betting all your chips there in AEC, you're betting wrong. Instead, you do need to think about content marketing and event marketing and podcasts like we're doing right now. There are so many different ways to touch those prospective buyers. And I think honestly, what you need to do is put yourself in a mindset of experimentation and try a lot of them, right? And then zero in on the things that are working for you in that situation with that customer and double down.
I've got a very good one, Owen, for both of us, actually. So we've been having these battles between me and him for 2 years probably now. Is content person should be the same person who is doing the marketing within a business, or they should be separate people?
Well, so technically, like a content person probably rolls up and reports into a marketing organization. They're part of that, right? So yes, a content person is a content marketer, most of the time. That's, if I were designing a marketing org from scratch, that's probably where I would put that person.
Who was right then, Martin?
I was right.
I can't even remember where my conviction was now.
You can't have the two people doing the same thing and expect there will be consistent results here.
Yeah,
but that's just my feeling.
But it also depends, because say like you're in, maybe we'll get to this question. Say you're in the early stages, you need a bit more of a all-rounder. Then perhaps there is one person that can take care of multiple channels.
I think no, because then you're talking against what Phil said, that you need to know your customer. So that means that you really need to know who you're selling, what you're selling. So the message should be very, very precise rather than all around.
Well, the interesting question, right, is like, okay, if they weren't part of the marketing organization, where would you put them, right? Would they be part of, the customer success team and writing help articles and whatnot? I would submit that's different. It's a different kind of content. So I would probably put them under marketing. Now they can do a lot of kinds of, content development if they're capable and flexible. But if you're thinking if you want to build the organization right from the beginning, I would put them there.
Yeah. Plus also now you see there's specific content marketers. So they would focus specifically on video, and you got some that a copywriter. Well, I mean, that's not a new profession, but I think the video one is probably a little bit more modern, where you have a specific person just doing that. So
yeah, that's true. And a variation on that theme, for example, think about SEO focused content development. There are often specialists who do that. Now they're part of a marketing organization for sure. But that's very different than, as you describe, Owen, the person who's creating videos.
Hey, Phil, what do you think about, as you mentioned it, SEO? How are you kind of thinking about AI based search and SEO? Is it disrupting what people should do? Is it a bit uncertain at the minute? People don't really know. Have you crafted any thoughts around this?
Yeah, I have. I think it is definitely changing how people get to information, right? That for sure is true. I mean, yesterday I was driving from point A to point B, and I was talking to Google Gemini, doing research questions about something that I wanted to do on my phone in the car, right? I mean, so I'm not Googling. I can't do that while I drive. but I could have a conversation, with an AI. So, wow, really, really different, right?
Uh-huh.
I think, though, from a marketer's perspective, if you think about how am I going to be successful if my prospects are engaging with information in different ways, I still think you are creating content in a similar fashion, and that is you are designing um, content that is very focused and rich and high quality, full of information, and as much as you can of it, um, such that it's there on the web and then found in different ways. So you might have Google Gemini or ChatGPT or Perplexity that are making it uh, available to someone who is curious and interested in exploring certain issues, or you're getting to it from Google. But regardless, um, in both situations, the fact that you've got really rich, useful information on your website that happens, by the way, to be nicely tied to what you do and who you are, that's valuable to the person who seeks that information. And how they get to it matters a little less.
Mm.
Mhm.
Mm, mm. I
How?
was sorry, Martin.
Go on.
I just wanted to rewind before we move on a little bit to Phil about some of the channels. So there was this very popular framework. I don't know if you're familiar with it, called Bullseye framework, by a book in a book called Traction, whereby it suggests that you pick various channels, do some little experiments on each of them. Like you might just spend $500 on one, 1,000 on another, whatever it might be, and you sort of like testing and then seeing which of those channels actually correlates or results in like success within marketing, say. Are there any frameworks similar to that which you suggest that people follow when they are testing channels in like earlier days?
Well, so I'll say, first of all, I'm a huge fan of testing and experimentation. And I think, the framework that you just described, look, it's not rocket science. You begin with hypotheses about where you think you will find the target customers that you've identified as being most important to you. And then you test a variety of those. Now, some of those you can do with small budgets, and those are awesome. Um, you can do some paid search that way. You could do some digital direct advertising that way. Um, others others are harder to do with small budgets and may take more time to generate results for you, particular results that you can measure. So you may need to be a little bit more comfortable, A, testing at a higher spend level, or B, testing for longer duration. And I'll give you examples of both of those. So testing at a higher spend level, that may be event marketing. And
Hmm.
event marketing, particularly in AEC, I find to be very, very powerful. It's an integral element of many of the campaigns that I have seen that have been most successful for AEC companies,
You mean
because
physical or online?
these are physical, right?
Mhm.
So these are industry trade shows,
Mhm.
and it's just because a lot of the buyers, they want to get out and kick the tires, right? They want to talk to people, they want to see stuff, right? Remember, these are people that build things. They
Yeah.
they do work in the physical world, so
Mhm.
they also research in the physical world. They transact in the physical world, and
Mm.
you need to meet them where they are, which is
Mhm.
there. Now, those trade shows are not inexpensive, and you probably need to be running a number of them before you sort of figure out whether you're on the right track or not. So that's really different than Google AdWords, which you could turn on and turn off with the click of a button. Um, Also, like that, and I think we'll talk more about it over the course of this episode, is public relations. I'm a huge believer in the impact of public relations,
Mm.
and it has been one of the most important marketing elements that I've used in many startups that I have either built myself or consulted for. But that takes time to dial up. You don't just like flip a switch and immediately have success. You're probably several months into that before you even start to see the impact of that work. But you can see it and you can measure it, and it is particularly helpful. So you want to try a bunch of stuff, and give yourself a little grace, give yourself a little time to make sure you are measuring and assessing correctly. And then the stuff that's really working for you, like that's awesome for this company and this customer. For example, event marketing is killing it. Well, then do more, right? Figure out which other events that you haven't done yet are like those that have been successful for you, and let's go try those.
What are
Love it.
public relations in this sense? First thing that came to my head when you said that might sound shallow, but I don't know. Is it numbers of likes, following, impressions on the social media, like LinkedIn or other media? Or?
Not really. So the way I think about it is, public relations is identifying particularly journalists who are part of the segment in which you operate, and sharing story ideas with them and or influencing coverage that they may be thinking about, so that they write about you or talk about you. So it could be a traditional journalist who's writing, for a long-time print publication, or it could be a podcaster. It could be someone that's doing, that's doing intense and deep blog writing, right? So there are a lot of different ways that in AEC, media people, journalists, are communicating what they think of certain topics. But in PR, it's all about getting out there in front of them and influencing what they think, and shifting how they deliver their content so that it's in your favor or addresses issues that you want to address, or taking one step further and creating content for them. There are a lot of publications who are busy, and they just don't have time, to create all of their own content. So if you're smart and you come to them, you pitch a story and you're like, hey, look, I think that this would be a really intriguing, story idea for your publication. And guess what? I will write it for you. They're thrilled. This is called bylined content because your name is on the byline, like the line of attribution about who created it. And so publications are often, as I said, ecstatic to have you do that for them, takes the work out of their hands. And if you write well and give them information that's useful to their readers, they'll come back. They'll ask you to do it again and again.
Why do you think there's Phil? Because this actually, since a lot we spoke to, this has never really come up actually as being like a successful channel. So
Yeah.
I'm curious as to why you think that is the case. Why specifically PR is so good for the AEC industry.
So look, I've used PR to my advantage in technology startups in different industries that I have worked in for 4 decades now, right? And if you think about in general, why does it work? First of all, it's very cost effective. It is not that expensive to run a pretty influential public relations program. So when you're a startup and every dollar matters, you are really thinking hard about, where I spend those dollars, and PR is incredibly useful that way. Also, it gives you that kind of brand halo of the publication that is covering you, right? So if you're getting some really interesting article in Engineering News Record, ENR, which is a popular publication here in the United States, and they're saying good things about your company, well, guess what? You're getting this sort of de facto blessing, right, from another brand, a brand that really matters, right, in the world in which you operate. And so that's also incredibly important. And then journalists look to other journalists for inspiration about topics maybe that they might want to cover. So if you're getting lots of attention in the media, I guarantee you other journalists will see that and they will be in touch with you. Or when you are in touch with them, it will be that much easier to get them to pay attention to you because they've seen you elsewhere. Like, oh yeah, you know what? That's funny. I was walking my dog the other day and I listened to a really interesting podcast with you, right? And lo and behold, now you're talking to them.
And these have usually the largest organizations have very large reach, right? So they have distribution.
And they can reach thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, right, in their audience. And sometimes, when you go to, I'm going to call it new media forums, like, for example, I know in Europe, the YouTube channel, the B1M, is very popular, right? And their videos are super cool. And if you work with them and you produce the right video together, you might reach millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the scale can be tremendous. But even if it's a smaller scale, let's say you reach an audience of just 10,000. Well, if it's 10,000 of the right people for your very specific product, and the audience that you seek, that's brilliant. That's 10,000 incredibly well qualified prospects that you've now touched.
Phil, what are the on the PR front? What are the sort of mediums, and even perhaps within AEC, like some of the sources or specific publications, perhaps that you think people should be aware of?
Well, gosh, I mean, there are a lot of publications that are out there that focus on this now. And, I think of them somewhat sort of by media type, right? So that there are the old school guys like ENR. There are the newer publications that are online only, like Construction Dive, for example, I think is really good. There are people that are doing, I mean, there are all sorts of really great podcasts, I think, in our world. And that, I think, is a fascinating media form because it's long form, right? I mean, think about the kind of conversation that we're having right now. We really get to have some depth on things. And if you're just looking at a quick little blurb in an online newsletter, how deep are you really going to get? And that's why I think podcasts are so great, because you can really drill in to a topic with people who know their stuff. And as a consumer of that information, it's all the more valuable to you because you are able to get in deep.
Hey listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks and Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show.
Mm-hmm. Especially one that is outstanding. Okay, I wanted to ask about budgets for startups. What sort of budget is a small budget for a startup, and how like pre-seed startup should think about cost associated with marketing? What to allocate, in what way? Should they hire? Should they hire full-time, hire a consultant? What are your thoughts?
Budgets and team building.
Yeah. So let me share with you Phil's philosophy of team building and technology startups, which is, I think, a couple things. First of all, you need to have somebody who drives the bus, right? And it is better to have someone senior who can help you with that. Now, this may sound self-serving because, of course, I run a fractional, business, a consulting business, but I do think that startups often make a mistake in hiring someone to drive marketing who's young and cheap. And they're like, oh, that person's super smart and they'll figure it out. Well, but guess what? They're figuring it out on your dime. Right? And they're going to make mistakes for sure. And they're going to make some mistakes that are expensive. And why do that? As opposed to, I think, hiring someone who is experienced, knows the segment, has done this many times before. Maybe that person works for you full-time, maybe just part-time. And then surrounding them with, first of all, a core of what I call good athletes. So smart, maybe less experienced, but sharp people who can tackle a wide variety of different issues for you. And then enlisting where you need them, as you need them, specialists in certain disciplines, right? And you just hire them, kind of on an as needed basis for their expertise. That could be SEO, right? Which is a dark art and needs, I think, definitely someone who's knowledgeable and good at that. It could be PR. It assuredly should be design. You probably don't need a full-time designer when you are in an early stage startup. You can outsource that, whether it's for your website or your collateral materials or whatnot. And there are a lot of people literally all over the world that can do that for you at a pretty attractive rate. So those are examples of some of the specialists that I hire. But I've taken that model of a small, tight core of internal people, supplemented with specialists who are external as I need them. And I've done that for startup after startup that I've either worked for or have consulted for, right? And that is a very cost-efficient model. And, I've run small, tight teams just like that. If you compare the size of my team to like an engineering team that was being built out, or a customer success team, or any of the others in the org, mine was often the smallest team by a long shot, but had an impact that was way greater than you would think, given the number of bodies and seats.
Mm-hmm. Would you have any advice for founders? How can they measure the performance of a marketer?
And yes, I can. And I would say that, so first of all, very important to do that, right? Marketing needs to be measured and held accountable. I would say that different aspects of your marketing mix can be measured in different ways and to different degrees. So for example, online marketing, performance marketing, like running a campaign on Google AdWords or a campaign on LinkedIn, can be measured intensely, right? Because if you think about it, you get someone to click from an ad that they're seeing on Google, they land on a landing page, they see a demo, they move through the sales funnel, and ultimately that results in a sale. Well, if you've got your measurement systems set up well, you can track that person all the way through that customer journey, and you should. And you can come out with a cost per sale number, which is fantastic. Yeah, and you can even do that. You can do it cost per sale, for sure, cost per sale by campaign type or source, right? So what you could measure for Google, you could measure for LinkedIn. You can do the same thing for event marketing. Okay, great. So I went to a trade show and I had a conversation with someone. That conversation continued when I went back to the office. We did a demo that ended up in a big discussion with sales and so forth and so on, and ultimately closed sales. So you can follow and should follow all of that. There are some things that are harder to measure, but that you can also. So for example, PR, if you think about that, how can you measure that impact? Well, you certainly can measure the direct traffic. So sometimes people, they see an article in Construction Dive, they click on it, they come to your website, and you can follow them the exact same way. But there are also less precise ways in which you might measure that. So let's say, for example, someone read about you in one of these articles, and they didn't come directly to your website, but your salesperson is having a conversation with them that started somehow, somewhere, and they tell you like, oh yeah, you know what, that article that you guys wrote about online scheduling that I read in this publication really influenced how I think about this. I'm glad you called. Right? Okay, great. That's anecdotal evidence, right? And you're not going to get that every time, but you will get it some. So I think it is important for particularly tech CEOs just to understand that there will be different marketing programs that are measurable to different degrees, and that should be okay, right? Not everything is as measurable as AdWords is, and that's fine. There are other programs that are super influential, but that you can't count down to the last penny, and you kind of need to get comfortable with that.
How do you figure out what's the best like marketing strategy? Is it based on the product or like vertical within the construction? Maybe if we have a robotic solution, it's probably different. Or maybe, I don't know, actually, than like typical software play. So like, how do you go about figuring out what's the right thing to do?
I think it's very much product and customer driven, right? So if you think about, okay, what am I selling and to whom? That overarching question should then drive your marketing program development. Because if you really dialed in on answers to those questions, what am I selling and to whom? Then that can help you figure out, okay, great. So now I know those things. Where do I reach them? Where do I influence them? And that in turn helps you develop good hypotheses. And then you get out in the market and you try those things, right? And I think, by the way, having an experimenter's mentality is super important in marketing. You just need to get out there and try things. You need to be okay with failure because you will fail. Not everything's going to work. And frankly, if everything you're doing is working, I would submit you're not doing enough things. You're not trying enough things. Because you need to take some risks. You know, look, we're a startup. We're not IBM, right? So, you know, you need to try things that are maybe unusual, maybe even a little bit risky. But that's the cool thing about being part of a startup, right? Is that you can do those things. You can push the boundaries a little bit. You know, maybe you get in hot water if you were at IBM, if you did, you know, something like you're thinking about doing, right? But you can push the envelope, and you should in a startup. So this experimenter's mentality, I think, is critical and will actually help you stir up some opportunities that others won't and can't pursue, but that you can because you have degrees of freedom as a startup.
Phil, would you recommend that people dress up as dinosaurs at events and advertise their product in such a way? I've seen it a few times.
So there was a trade show once in which my company ran this kind of, I'm going to call it a stunt, where we hired a bunch of circus performers and we had them lead a parade through the trade show floor during cocktail hours with acrobats and people on unicycles and big banners and you know, and whatnot. I mean, it was absolutely unexpected, and we totally seized the moment and generated a ton of conversation about that. So yeah, and I've done something that was pretty close to what you just suggested. And you know, again, that's taking risk, and we did. And in terms of, you know, catching people's attention and generating conversations, which you want at events like that, it worked.
How do you feel, Phil? Did you? So we debated this on the on our podcast we recorded yesterday about. I don't know if you. By the time this comes out, this will probably have aged quite a bit. So for people listening, yeah, this is quite a recent development. But Autodesk, I don't know if you saw the new advert where they have they were depicting God.
I haven't seen it yet. I'm not sure I want to.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. So yeah, they were effectively saying that even Autodesk lets God have a day off, and they hired a comedic actor called Tony Hale to dress up as God, and that was like their marketing. And we were just like, we was thinking, we were debating it yesterday, and yeah, I guess I was curious in your opinion, but you haven't seen it.
Well,
but
I will say, so I'll say this. Look, kudos to them for taking risk. Like they clearly did. And hey, it's Autodesk, which is a big company and doesn't usually take risks like that. I'm not sure that's the risk I would have taken, because it sounds to me like you're in a really sensitive area.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, I guess we'll see what happens. But I mean, think about this. This is interesting.
We're talking about it.
Yes, exactly, Martin. Exactly. It's generating a conversation. And that's probably what they wanted. So something's working.
Yeah, 100% agree. Hey, Phil, how do you feel about like there does seem to be like almost a playbook to some extent within AEC industry. And I'll give you an example perhaps of people that produce case studies of their product in collaboration with a large customer, and apparently that gives you social proof and credibility for other similar customers in that space. But my viewpoint is that if everyone is doing that, then why is it an effective approach? And you're not going to really stand out, which perhaps is a function of the marketing department. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think actually that the customer case studies are a pretty important part of the mix of activities that you should do. Because as we were talking about earlier, I think that in this industry, very much companies look around and see what others are up to, right? What are they trying? What's worked for them? And that happens informally because they have conversations with their peers, right? It also happens formally when they're reading a customer case study in an industry publication, or they're seeing a video on your website, or what have you. But companies watch other companies and are influenced by that. It's also, remember, as we were talking about that crossing the chasm idea, when you're pushing into the group of early adopters, they really want and need that. They need that proof, Owen, that you described, that like, look, this works, right? Others have shown that it works. And if I'm going to take the risk of bringing this technology into my organization, I want to believe that some others have done that and it's been successful to them. So there are lots of cool ways you can do case studies. It doesn't have to all be something that you read these days. I mean, gosh, video case studies, I think, have become incredibly popular, and with good reason. They're short, they can be punchy. You can consume them, in not just in front of a laptop, but you can watch one on your phone, right? As you're on the tube or something. So I think that there are lots of different ways to deliver case studies now, but they're an integral part of so many marketers' programs for a reason. And the reason is because they work.
Lovely.
What should be the tech stack of a marketer within AEC?
Ooh, wow. That's true. We could talk about that for a long time.
There's an abundance of solutions. Huh?
Yeah, and it's tricky. So I'll make one overarching point, which is, I don't think that there's any silver bullet solution, and you shouldn't look for that. One company will not provide you with all of the tools that you require, and if you're chasing that, I think you're chasing a fantasy. That being said, it is nice when you can have one thing that will do at least multiple pieces of the tech stack for you. I'm a huge HubSpot fan. I think that young companies in particular often over tool, and they get too many vendors, and then they're buying stuff that they don't need, and they are stepping up to solutions that are doing too much for them. Like, I see so many people, for example, default to Salesforce because it's like, oh, it's like what we always do, and then like, okay, well, you've got Salesforce, which is way more power than you need, and then you're also trying to have it talk to your CRM, which or your other applications, right? So I would say, for example, HubSpot is super. Like, you can manage your website on HubSpot. You can have it run, your customer database and your outbound emails and all that stuff. And then it needs to talk to Salesforce too. And then all of a sudden you're hiring a consultant to get one thing to talk to the other thing. Like, try to keep it simple. Don't think there's a such thing as a silver bullet, however, and don't over tool, right? Add tools slowly, and see how they plug into the stack, and just like be cautious about that. I can't tell you how many startups I have seen where they're running Notion, and they other stuff on Google Docs, and then they have Jira, and then they have this, and they have that, and then they have Salesforce. I'm like, guys, we are spending so much money on all these tools, and we do not need them all. So like, let's chill out here and be a little bit more reasonable about that.
Phil, this is a very open question, and you kind of answered it already with like the team and how that develops through the stages of a life cycle of a startup. But are there any other thoughts generally about how the marketing strategy scales as a company grows too?
Yes, I think that sort of what you're doing over time, ideally, is you can think about it as like think about it as an archery target, right? With concentric circles, you've got the bullseye in the center, and then you've got layers that progress outward, right? So, in the beginning, you're trying those things that you know that that are going to work for you and that you can afford, right? So, let's say you're doing some search engine marketing, you're doing some PR, and you're doing some events, right? That would be a typical set of activities for a young technology company. And you're testing within each of those domains and figuring out what works, right? So the scaling happens as the company grows naturally because your business targets increase. You've got sales forecasts, and your investors are expecting that you're going to continue to deliver more and more. The typical model in startups these days is triple, double, double, right?
Easy.
And that's no small thing to do, right? So you're going to be having to deliver as a marketer an increasing number of qualified leads for your salespeople to ultimately convert into sales. So you're testing these different programs and then scaling the ones that work, right? So you're constantly adding to push outward and do more. Maybe, for example, the event marketing that you're doing rather is working quite well. So you're thinking, then what other events could I do? Maybe I'm doing some that are in different regions than I've tried before, or maybe there's a target customer that or a target persona who's adjacent to the one that I have sold into most frequently, but I think will work, right? So you're kind of pushing the boundaries of the stuff that has already delivered for you, and then you're starting to add new things, right? Because some things only scale so much. For example, while I've explained to you guys how much I'm a fan of PR, huge fan, it's not infinitely scalable, right? You can only sort of start to spend too much or so much on PR, I think, before you're seeing decreasing returns. In contrast, you can scale something like AdWords, depending on the segment in which you're operating, potentially a lot more, right? And you can spend a lot more budget on that. Now, you need to make sure you're watching ROI carefully. So some things only scale so much. So you need to add other programs to the mix so that you can keep hitting those aggressive growth targets.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I think for successful go-to-market, one needs to have very well done marketing and very good sales engine.
Yes.
How to make sure that marketing corresponds and talks with sales in the right way so it's the most efficient machine possible?
I think it starts at the leadership level, right? I really do think that the marketing sales leader and marketing leader and the sales leader need to be in sync, and then continue to communicate actively about what's going on, right? So you need to agree on strategy, and then you need to be talking constantly about results, right? So if I'm the marketing person, like I am very eager to hear, sales team, am I delivering to you leads that you are converting? And if not, why? Like, help me understand why you think that that's not the right kind of lead for you, because that will help me in turn tune the dials, right? And look for maybe a slightly different kind of target customer. Maybe I need a different lead source. In that sort of doctrine of experimentation that I've talked about, like I'm going to experiment best based on feedback, and feedback from my team in the field is critical. If you think about it, they really are the ones that are particularly close to the customer day in, day out. And I would be foolish if I didn't listen really carefully to what they had to say and make changes based on that.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Phil, I guess we have another 10, 20 minutes or so. I think it would be interesting to hear about some of your work and some specific marketing campaigns that were a success, or stuff maybe that didn't work, or even some companies perhaps that you work, if you can name them, that you've helped. So I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, maybe you can also mention, how do you usually work with startups? What's the process?
So in working with startups, I take a very consultative approach, right? And I try to do a nonpartisan look, an outsider's look at what's going on, right? Where are we starting, right? So set the foundation, and that comes through conversations with people on the inside. It may come from conversations with prospects, or influencers in the industry analysts, right? Like I go out there and I do my homework, right? And then I come back to the prospect and I'll say, like, look, this is the situation that I see. And then I will start to put forth some recommendations. Here's what I think you could do. And I'll talk about programs, I'll talk about staff, I'll talk about budget, and kind of lay that out for a potential client so they can really understand what would the path forward look like. And I think that the more specific you can be when doing that, the more helpful it is for a client, right? And they say, okay, I get it. I know what you would do. I know how much it would cost. I know how I'd measure it. It provides a degree of comfort and confidence, particularly that they may not have, because look, they're not marketers, right? That's why they're coming to you, right? They're not marketers. They may be AEC experts. They may be technical, but giving them that path forward really helps. Then you engage, right? And you get inside and you roll up your sleeves and get dirty. Right? You gotta really dig in and start generating results. I think it's super important to put points on the board, as I say, right? And help these companies see early on that you're not just doing the strategy, or you're actually making stuff happen. Because I think people, if you're just thinking up in the clouds, get anxious about that. They want to see you as a startup marketer, like, make an influence in their business too, right? And so I really try to show that in a variety of ways, as quickly as I can. And then over time, you're starting to build out that team, right? So that internal team, that external team, and often in that, with a startup, the person that's hiring you is the CEO, and so you need to then be having regular conversations with the CEO to help them understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and you're also building relationships with others inside, particularly, as I said, in sales, right? I think it's just so critical that sales and marketing leaders are working hand in glove. So that's how I have done it. Without naming too many names, like I've done this for a variety of different companies in the AEC space, particularly in construction scheduling, which is where I have some pretty deep expertise, and I've worked with a number of companies there, and and then beyond, right? And also, of course, I've consulted for companies outside of AEC, and have done that, in everything from virtual reality gaming to what else has been interesting, to medical devices and more, right? So I'm a really curious guy, and my mind doesn't stop. So I like getting involved in new things, new sectors, and of course, different varieties of startups within a sector. AEC is beautiful. There's so many problems for us to solve, right? I mean, you could make your entire career just in AEC, and Lord knows for the past couple of years, I spent a lot of my time there.
How about some campaign, like some stuff that you've implemented, Phil, that you have seen good success with, and then even stuff that you think, perhaps was not so successful. Lessons learned always valuable.
Yeah, lessons learned for sure. So I would say, I'm thinking about a client for which I worked, and a particular aspect of a program that I worked on for them, which was event marketing, right? And with that, I think what worked was we had an experimenter's mindset, and we started with events that were really kind of a close match with what this particular company did, and this was working scheduling, and tested there with those that were the best fit, and then ultimately pushed to things that were adjacent, and then also tried some things that we just weren't sure that were going to work. So for example, we tested a really large trade show, World of Concrete, right? Which you've ever heard of. I mean, it's this giant
Huge.
Vegas, right? It's unbelievable. I mean, there are all sorts of different companies that are there, and there are giant concrete spewing machines that are as tall as the roof of the Vegas Convention Center, and a lot of attendees, right? And so it was interesting. I mean, there were companies in our world or adjacent to our world, like Procore, for example, that were there. And I think for them, it worked because they were trying to reach a much broader audience than we were. And, they were there with their, machine that stamps out custom hats, and so giving away swag and other such things.
What a great investment.
Yeah. I don't know how they measured success, but seemed to work for them, and they've done it more than once. For us, it was too big, right? We weren't reaching efficiently the kind of prospective buyer that we needed to reach. And instead we were getting a lot of, really small contractors who were coming by, and, they just wanted the latest piece of our swag to like throw in the bag and move on. And, when you looked ultimately at, okay, well, what sort of sales did we generate from that particular event? Would we do it again? The answer is we wouldn't do it again, right? Because we put a lot of time and effort and energy into it, and the results were modest. But okay, right? That's an experimenter's mindset. Ditch that one, and find two more to which you can devote the budget that are more like the ones that have been most successful for you, right? So that just gives you a little taste of the kinds of things that have been part of a marketing program that I have done a lot of.
Nice.
What about copy, paste, adjust strategy? So you're seeing what someone else is doing and mimic it and just do it better, and maybe adjust it to your circumstances or your product or service.
So, they kind of have a term for that. They call it a fast follower, right? And that could be in a business idea, like a space, right? Or it can be at a campaign level. And I actually think that there are some advantages to being a fast follower, right? You get to look at what someone else has done. You get to critique it, right? Think about, all right, well, I think this was well considered and well executed, but these other pieces of it, no, like they missed it, right? They could have done this better. If you can grab an idea quickly and do it better elsewhere, and not just be seen as a copycat while doing it, fantastic, right? I think that's a-okay. Like, one should not be ashamed that everything you do in your marketing work, you don't need to feel like it all needs to be original, right? Borrowing is a-okay. I think.
I 100% agree.
And improving upon it, right? Because if you think about it, even the stuff that you're doing yourself, you have an idea, you execute it, and then you improve upon it. So why not, Why not take inspiration elsewhere and do it better?
Okay.
Okay, last one from me would be about what have you seen, like what trends do you see emerging specifically within AEC technology space, that perhaps you believe are not getting the attention they deserve?
But you're asking that like technologies within marketing or ways to market or
Ways to
more?
market, more specifically, like channels perhaps, or I
That
don't know.
seems interesting.
Technologies, maybe even, yeah. Like obviously AI is gonna come up, but
Well, and you know what's so? Let's talk about AI for a minute. And I'll talk about it at a sort of an industry level, and then I'll talk about it from the perspective of the marketer. From the industry level, I think that there's a shift happening. When AI sort of first burst onto the scene, with the emergence of ChatGPT and whatnot, there was a year or two when it was all people were talking about, and a lot of marketing for products that could justify this was AI led, right? It was very, very focused on the AI aspects of those products or services. I think that then there was a bit of a backlash, and people got tired of that, and what's happening now, I think, is that AI is going to be just expected, right? In so many different tools, it's going to become an ingredient. And sometimes that ingredient will be more influential. It's the intel inside, right? So you're focusing some spotlight on that ingredient, and other times it's not going to be the focal point anymore. But that's a change, right? First couple of years, whoo, AI was everything, and it got a lot of attention, and it was sexy and interesting, and not so much anymore. And I think that's only going to continue to increase. Then, with respect to the role of AI in the world of marketing, I think we're just starting to see the impact here that this is going to have, and it's certainly interesting. You can think about it, with research that you might be doing on an issue. I mean, God, the Chat GPTs and Google Geminis of the world are so helpful to me as I'm trying to learn more about something. So incredibly helpful. They're great brainstorming tools. I was using Gemini just the other day in order to help me brainstorm topics about which we might want to create bylined articles for the media. And I probably spent maybe about 45 minutes, back and forth, crafting a good prompt to begin, and then doing some back and forth with the engine in order to create ideas. And I came up with a list of like 10 really good topics that I think I could write about. And that's awesome. I've used it for LinkedIn copy creation, and just like the list goes on. I think there will be an increasing amount of AI driven engagement between prospect and company. If you think about the AI powered chatbots, right, that now exist, on many websites, they're handling the first line of inquiry between a potential buyer and the company. And indeed, I worked for a while right before I got pretty deep into AEC tech and began doing almost only AEC tech as the interim VP of marketing for a company down in Mexico City, that was focused on creating these AI powered chatbots to encourage a dialogue back and forth between prospect and customer. And like what they could do was fantastic. Someone could come onto the website of Aeromexico, for example, and book their travel entirely through the chatbot, which was really cool. So we are only at the beginning of seeing all the different ways in which AI is going to influence marketers and marketing. It's just going to make us better and more efficient. So I'm an eager adopter of these new things, and I'm totally willing to try stuff as it comes my way. And I'm always amazed and humbled, frankly, at what they can do. So, more good things coming. I know that.
Okay, Phil. Thank you for that. So tell us where people can find out more about you and how we can help.
Yes. So I have a website for my company. It's called the Ronin Studio, Ronin, Ronin. So the roninstudio.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Phil Carpenter. And I would love to chat with people about their marketing issues and how I might be able to help.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the conversation, guys.